So with that, we're going to talk about that and some other things. Please welcome Barbara Cargill.
Well, good evening. I'm afraid to touch anything. And so, what do I hit to make it happen? Just hit. Oh, okay. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming. I know a lot of you have been out at the cold working today, and all I can say, and JD with me, thank God we're not running right now. That's so wonderful. I think God gives us what we can handle, and I'm not quite sure I could have handled another campaign plus serving as chair of the board. So, but it is a privilege to be here. And on that note, I do want to thank so many of you in the room again, because you helped me win my third term last time. So I'm now in the second year of my third term. And I think you know, most of you know, I'm kind of trapped in here with wires. You know how I like to be on top of everybody around here. Then I'll go back and forth. You might remember my story when the governor did ask me to serve as chair. I said a big fat no! Exclamation point. But then he decided to run for his for president, as we all know, and he needed someone with a really boring closet, with zero skeletons, and that would be me, I guess. So a month passed, between my initial no, exclamation point, and then when I got the phone call again, but this time I very wisely asked him if I could meet with him and bring my son with me, who was going to be a senior in high school. Because my twins were already in college, all boys, and we just paid our last triple tuition. Can I just throw that out there? My twins are graduating, and then my youngest is a sophomore at UT. But it is that youngest son, Connor, and I who actually met with the governor, and I might as well have not been there because the governor just right there. He knew who to talk to, right? To help convince mom to serve as chair. So I very unwillingly and very, well, you know what? That's how God uses you the most, isn't it? When you're not quite willing and when you're very, very weak. And even when you're a little petrified. And so God can do amazing things through that. And I think the board has come a long way. I hope you have not read about any antics and craziness that's been going on at board level. I really try to run a tight ship. And I probably overextend a little much. We had one hearing not so long ago that I thought might get unruly, and I had not one but two security guards. So I'd rather overplan than underplan. So, but this is my last year in office as chair, and then I will be term limited out. And so someone else will take over as chair. But I've got so much to talk to you about, so give me a time. I have till 20 minutes, and then I'm going to do Q&A, right? Okay, well. And I brought the slides because it'll keep me on track. So I'm going to cover what just recently happened with HB5, and then we'll get a little bit into the textbooks like Julie talked about, which will kind of lead us into C-Scope if you would like an update on that. And then if you're dying to know a little bit about Common Core and what's going on with that, I'll try to throw some of that in for good measure during the Q&A. But let's talk about what happened during the session. Because House Bill 5, okay, I just hit the little thing with the arrow. No, it didn't work. Right here. Oh, there you go. All right, so would you hit that one? Okay. All right, so I'm not going to go into like just a lot of detail. I'm going to give you the bottom line. And that is that for the past, I think it's been since maybe 14 years, 12 or 14 years, students in the state of Texas have graduated under what is called the 4x4. Which is 4 years of the core subjects each. So 4 math, 4 science, 4 social studies, 4 courses in English, right? Very rigorous. That's what my children graduated under, and that's what we've operated under for a long time. But there was a big movement in the legislature during this last session in which I think legislators were listening to more and more constituents and more people from smaller business and et cetera who are needing students to come out either right out of high school or right out of community college to fill jobs. And I think the number one job that kept being repeated in legislature was they needed welders. So, and anyway, I'm just telling you what I think I heard. And I'm not going to, there are a few things in the bill I don't like, but I'll start by telling you what I do like. And that is it does give students more flexibility. Now, instead of just having 5 electives, a student can graduate with up to 7, and sometimes even more. So every student is required to graduate with what is called the foundation, okay? That's the graduation plan. So that's 4 English, so we've still got that, 3 math, 3 science, and 3 social studies. But don't have a fit yet, because students that graduate with this will only graduate with 22 credits. So we're talking about our students who are probably barely hanging on, right? Our students who are working several jobs, maybe they have a child at home, sick parents, you name it. There are a lot of reasons that a student might need to graduate just with the 22 credits. But most students, well, here are a few other things that are still required. Students still have to take a credit in PE. They still have to take, well, they have to take languages other than English. I'm going to try and not be too negative. However, students may substitute 2 years of a computer language or the foreign language. So as I gulp, because I'm thinking that's even different parts of the brain, kind of the linguistics, like Spanish, because I think computer language is mainly X's and O's and weird symbols and things,
Ones
right?
and twos.
I'll comment a little bit more on that later. Fine arts is still required, and then I talked to you about the 5 credits. Now, let me show you what most of our students will graduate under. They will graduate with that foundation. Remember the foundation I showed you? But they will also add what is called an endorsement. If you want to simplify it, you might have called it in college a major. But we're going to use the big word endorsement because that's what our state is using. So in addition to, I don't know if you remember, but remember a student had to take 4 years of English on the foundation? Look what's added now if they graduate with an endorsement. And this is going to be most of your students, my boys. You know, about 80% of our graduates, maybe even more, will be on the foundation plan with an endorsement. And there are 5 endorsements. I don't know if you can see that this far. Students will choose these typically at the end of their 8th grade year. They can still change until their sophomore year, but for those of you who have students in junior high, you need to kind of start thinking. One option is STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and math. Business and industry is another one. Public service is another. That'd be like the police, firefighters, health science, etc. Arts and humanities, and then multidisciplinary is kind of a hodgepodge because there are some small school districts who might not be able to offer all of the courses that a student needs within maybe the next couple of years to graduate. Maybe with a STEM endorsement, they might have a little bit of trouble getting all the requirements that would be needed for a student to graduate under STEM, okay? So, but watch what happens when a student does graduate with an endorsement. They don't have to have 3 years of math anymore, they have to have 4. That's good, that's real good. They can't graduate with just 3 credits in science if they're going to graduate with an endorsement, which is 26 credits. They have to have a 4th science. That's great. Do you see social studies up there? History? 3 years now, not 4. Another little part that I have an issue with. So students will be required to take American history. They will be required to either take world geography, or they have to have government and economics, American history, and then they pick between world history and world geography. I'm kind of thankful my boys didn't have the choice because I think another war would have broken out in our house. I have a son who is majoring in performing arts, theater in California. He would have fallen perfectly under the arts and humanities. Would my husband and I have required him, mandated, put our foot down, and you have to have 4 years of science, you bet. But there's a little caveat, because if students choose the arts and humanities endorsement, they can skip their senior year of science. Mama wouldn't like that. And I would tell you, every college that he applied to, because he was very into the fine arts, he still had to take college math and college science. So the reason I'm telling you this is because I think the thing that bothers me the most about the bill is getting the word out to the parents. The uninformed parents who are very busy, or there's a language barrier, or they're working several jobs. Yeah, we need to be able to tell them, okay, your student has chosen not to take 2 years of Spanish, and he or she wants to take 2 years of computer language, but you need to know that colleges are still going to be going down that transcript, and they're still looking for those 2 years of a foreign language, right? Maybe not so much if their goal is to go to community college and get an associate degree. Maybe not so much there, okay? So this is the main thing. So instead of being 4x4 by 4x4, which is what we've been on, the 4x4 for well over a decade, we are now on, under the endorsement plan, a 4x4 by 4 by 3. Social studies isn't listed, but only 3 years there. And so that does give students an extra chance to earn more electives in a field that they're interested in. And I will tell you, career and technology education is such a big thing in Texas, and we have 195 different courses that school districts can choose from. Isn't that cool? And we are actually revising and reviewing. We have volunteers that are going to meet this summer to go over the curriculum standards for all of those courses. And if you think that it's just home ec or auto mechanics anymore, it's like CSI, forensic, and it's floral design, and it's culinary arts. I know that Conroe High School has a brand new, huge commercial kitchen that they let their students learn to work in the restaurant or food industry. I mean, it's really amazing the different courses that are available. Now, will districts offer all 195? No. But they pick and choose based on what their student population needs. Okay. Of course, the big debate that you probably read about in the paper was over what? Algebra 2, right? Did you read that? So a student may still graduate. They can graduate with an endorsement, but to earn what is called the distinguished level, which means top 10%, they must take Algebra 2. So what the legislature did, I think it's probably a good idea, is they tie Algebra 2 to top 10%. So and this is another area where I really, really want the uninformed parents to be informed. Because if their student does not take Algebra 2, they can't qualify for top 10% no matter what their GPA is. And that's unusual, that's different. Typically all these years, top 10% has been tied to GPA only. But now it's GPA plus, you have to have had Algebra 2, which is interesting. So the legislature, and you might have seen the big debate back in last spring over Algebra 2, and overwhelmingly, almost unanimously, House Bill 5 passed. And so the reason I'm pointing out some of these little issues to you and things that I'm not particularly supportive of is so that you can get the word out. And if you know parents, or if you know people who might not know about the bill, because this starts with next year's freshmen, so your kids will be involved. Raise your hand if you have someone younger or who will be a freshman next year or younger. You have kids that are, you gotta raise your hand up. Or grandchildren. What about just friends' children? Right, there you go. You fit everything, right? So that's why I want to get the word out. Now, the big thing was about Algebra 2. And what the legislature did is and I'll put it in Senator Letitia Vanderpute's words, they punted the implementation of the bill to the State Board of Education, and rightly so, because we've been overseeing graduation plan implementation for many, many years. I'm not a rubber stamp kind of chair, though, and so I basically just started over researching on my own and with the board the whole issue on Algebra 2. I wanted to see the research. I contacted both chairs of public ed in the Senate and the House and asked for their research on it, and they did send some information over. And we have public hearings. We had 2 public hearings with over, about 150 people who came to testify about House Bill 5. And most of them were focused either on speech. Did you notice speech is not listed anymore? That's no longer a requirement. And then also, they were there to talk about Algebra 2. I didn't start out to be an Algebra 2 cheerleader. I'm a science teacher. I'm a science cheerleader, okay? But Algebra 2, based on all the research and all the testimony, is the gatekeeper course. So when students go to community college, they have to take a placement test that's called the TSI, Texas Success Initiative. It covers Algebra 2. It covers other math as well, but it goes through Algebra 2 and even has a little bit of pre-cal. Now, you know about the SAT and ACT. You know that that tests Algebra 2. So do you see what I'm saying? Even if we want our students to go straight and get an associate degree or a certification and go to community college, I would think we want that for all of our kids, right? We want all of our students to start somewhere and then to step and to step and to step and kind of go up vertically, right? The more education, the better. And so I'm telling you that because that is what I personally learned about Algebra 2. Fortunately, the way that the board was able to list the math courses that our students have to take, and before you get too excited, there's going to be a but at the end of my sentence. But, okay, so just be ready. The way we were able to list the math courses in Texas that all students under the endorsement plan must take, we were able to strategically write the list in such a way that all students must still take Algebra 2 or a course that requires it as a prerequisite. That's awesome, isn't it? That's great. But are you ready for the but? But in statute, it is written in House Bill 5 that every school district must offer a remedial math course for seniors. That's not happened at the high school level before, the remedial classes, and you've probably heard how overflowing they are, how many kids are in developmental ed, particularly as freshmen in community college. And, you know, the parent still pays for the course, but the student doesn't get credit, right? I mean, it doesn't count for GPA or anything. So it's like a big whirlpool, and the number of kids that get out of that remedial ed is very, very low. It's just like, just sucks them in. So I'll be very interested to see what happens with this new guideline, this new direction. My hope is that it's going to really, really help gird those seniors up. And I'll give you one thing, they have to test into it. They can't just decide, I want to take remedial ed as a senior. That's not the goal at all. They have to be performing very poorly in coursework, or they have to do very poorly on the Algebra 1 end of course in high school, or the SAT, ACT. See what I'm saying? So they have to test into it. So that's another good thing. It's not just for any student who wants to just kind of take a year off and do nothing. All right, so that's all the time I'm going to spend on House Bill 5, but I'll take questions at the end if you do have questions. Just wanted to lay the groundwork for that. It was an amazing, very intense few months. We were hearing from a lot of legislators about their intent, which was for flexibility and for Algebra 2 to not be required. I feel that the board, we honored that. We ended up with a 14-1 vote on the entire graduation plan. And I'll tell you what, if somebody had told me back this summer that we would end up with a vote like that, I would have thought they were crazy. We were very, very divided on how it would be implemented. So that's been a huge blessing and reflects a lot of work on the part of my board, on their part and my part, all of us. So, okay, so this is what Julie was referring to a little bit earlier. And you know what? This part was created here on a poster board. Were you, any of you here when I drew on that poster board? And I was like just off the top of my head. So we're going to switch gears a little bit and we're going to talk about textbooks. Okay? Okay. And I've been over this with you before, but for those of you that were not here, now this was not the last session. SB6 was not this past session. It was the one before. Yeah. So it's been about, what, 3 years by my math? Okay. So the State Board of Education, you can't see my finger, right here. This is the adoption process that is in place with the State Board of Education. It's very rigorous. It's all volunteers that we invite to be part of those panels. Teachers, business people, parents, etc. I've had so many different kinds of citizens. I love hearing from retirees now. I'm hearing from a lot of retirees who want to review books, which I think is fantastic. Samples are made available to the public. The review period lasts about 6 to 8 months. Time is given for online input and public testimony. We just got through hearing public testimony about the science books and about K-8 math books. This summer, you know what's coming? The history books. That'll be big, big. There are strict rules in place regarding publisher contact with work panels in the board, and fines are given for, this is huge, fines are given for publisher errors that they do not correct after they've been found. okay? This is a very, very rigorous process. Before Senate Bill 6, right, publishers came to Texas, almost basically had to go through the adoption process because the only way that state funds could be used on those books were if they had been adopted by the board, if they had been approved and vetted. So do you think many publishers went outside of the process? No, because the districts couldn't use their state money. That doesn't make any sense. So large amounts of the publishers were going through the board's process and being vetted. All right, so let's flip over to after Senate Bill 6, and this is what the concern is, and this is what I'm really hoping to rally the troops with me for this next session to get this changed or corrected or at least made better. Another option was created in that publishers can go straight to the school districts. Districts can use their state money, whether or not the book has been vetted through the adoption process or not. That responsibility is given to the school districts. School districts do have to sign a certification that's online, and this certification basically it's a checklist that the districts have to check off to ensure that they are covering 100% of the curriculum standards for every grade in every subject. And it has to be signed by the superintendent and then the school board president and the school board secretary. So that does give it a little bit of oomph, because if I'm going to sign my name on something, if I'm a school board member, or you on your school board, you're not going to give your signature away lightly. Do I prefer that school districts choose the books that have been vetted by our volunteers? Yes, of course I do. Because they've gone through, they've made sure the curriculum standards have been covered, and they also make sure that that the errors have been turned in and corrected, okay? All right, so why does this tie in with C-Scope? Well, I'll tell you why it ties in with C-Scope. And I'm going to catch you up to date, hot off the press, current, what's going on with that. C-Scope was not exactly a textbook. It was more designed to be lesson plans. You might know that. However, they crossed over a little bit because a lot of the lessons did contain instructional material, dates, information about patriotic figures, information about battles or wars. See the difference? I mean, when you start going into the instructional side of it, that's where many of their errors, I think, were made. But because they were lesson plans, they could also cross over into activities and tests and different things. If it was for science, labs, right? All kinds of different ideas for the teachers. That's where they got into a little bit of trouble, was with some of the content. And so you probably remember this is ground zero. My district is ground zero for where all of where C-Scope was laid bare. And that's pretty amazing, because that was parents like you, it was concerned citizens who really got out there and started looking at that. All right, here's what I would love. All that passion and all that energy and all that go-get-it attitude that so many citizens had about C-Scope. I want to put it in a bottle, and I want to take it with me to the Capitol come next session in January and try to do something about that textbook process where publishers are now skipping the vetting. I will tell you, this is what happened. We had over 500 science textbooks that publishers indicated would go through our process. Over 500 science books, K through 12. Out of that, maybe a couple of hundred actually went through. So what is that telling us? That's telling us that the majority bypassed our system. And since Common Core is in 45 other states, the Common Core standards, the curriculum standards, guess who the publishers are writing for now? It's a publisher's dream. 45 states are teaching the same standards. Who are their books going to be geared for? Of course. And people have been sending me copies of worksheets and lessons that their students are bringing home for homework, and it says Common Core at the top. I'm just not sure that's going to be so unusual anymore, because of the large number of states who are using Common Core. And then what do teachers have to choose from, or what do the districts have to choose from? I think there's always a way that they can take those lessons and they can tweak them and make them their own. I mean, that's what I always did. I very rarely just copied something straight from a book. So I do think that could be done. But let me quickly, before I take questions, bring you up to date on what has happened with C-Scope. So I did appoint an ad hoc committee of the board last March. We had a public hearing. It was a very good discussion. A lot of people spoke. But the review process that we had been asked to do by Senate Education was put on hold when the announcement was made that C-Scope was gone. Remember that? I think it was May. There was a press conference and it was announced that C-Scope was gone. So I thought to myself as chair, well, it's gone. You know, my ad hoc committee they can just, I guess there's nothing left for them to do, but many of you know what happened. The lessons entered the public domain. They became part of the public domain in August. And you can see them. If you go to I think it's on my next slide, the Texas Tribune website, they are the new, they are the ones that have the C-Scope lessons on them. They are housing the C-Scope lessons. That's where they are now. And anyone, they're part of the public domain, anyone can use them, anyone can copy them, anyone can do anything. So because of people like you, a lot of public input, a lot of Texans just out, you know, the lessons are still being used. Then I chose to put the evaluation process back into motion. Okay? We have 140 volunteers who just finished about a month ago reviewing the 431 social studies lessons. Remember, we had lost the summer. If this had happened over the summer, it would have been a much faster process. But thank God for our wonderful volunteers who stuck it out and who were able to squeeze it into a very busy, busy fall schedule. So here's the Texas Tribune website, and then here is where the evaluations are. I have looked at just a few of the evaluations for C-Scope. One of the main ones that I looked at, and I've got some more information on C-Scope up here. I can dig it. Let me find it. Okay. Of course, I went straight to U.S. history, and then I went to world history. There are quite a few errors that still had to be corrected. There were quite a few dates that were still incorrect in C-Scope. I think that probably, you know, one thing that bothered me that I saw in U.S. history that a reviewer had found is that students had to write an essay on the downfalls of extended prosperity. I don't really like that subject. I don't think that's a very good idea. I mean, are kids supposed to aim for the bottom? I mean, what are they? The downfalls of extended prosperity. So I think that there probably are still some things in there. I have not had time to look through all of the evaluations for all 431 lessons because they just became public a couple of weeks ago when we were able to download it. But let me tell you what was so cool about the evaluation of C-Scope, the C-Scope lessons. That our volunteer reviewers, because remember, C-Scope wasn't a textbook. So we didn't have to follow the state adoption process. We modeled after it, right? But we could go over and beyond and do what volunteers for our state used to be able to do before 1995 when the law was changed. Here's what they looked for. In the lesson plans, they checked for bias. Not just errors, they checked for bias. Did the materials, the C-Scope lessons, promote citizenship, patriotism, understanding and benefits of the free enterprise system, respect for individual rights, and respect for authority? Isn't that awesome? That's the kind of stuff, all right, positive aspects of the United States. I could go on. But here's the kind of the bum side to that is that our review panels for our state textbooks may no longer review for this. And I call it quality of content. Because remember, I said that our reviewers can only look for two things: errors and whether or not the curriculum standards are covered. So if George Washington is covered in a book, that gets a check. That book gets a check. How George Washington is covered is not reviewed. Now, there are a lot of reviewers who will write in the comments that they are very upset with how something is presented, and then it's just up to the publisher if they want to change it or not. We can't require them to change it unless it's truly a factual error. See, now do you see why I need help and why Julie was talking about that our hands are kind of tied? Actually, it's not my hands that are tied. it's your hands that are tied because you're the volunteer citizens who make up the state review panels. And I know that our science reviewers were very, very frustrated about that when they would read particular comment that they thought probably needed to be worked on, but nothing could be done because it was not an error. Now, do you think we're going to have some issues with social studies this summer? That's going to be a fun one. We have 154 books that publishers have indicated to us for K through 12 social studies. I don't really think that's a very high amount for all of K through 12. I know there are a lot more than 154 books out there for social studies. We've had over 700 applicants, 700 volunteers. That's so impressive, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to be appointed to a committee. I mean, it'll be down to the resumes and knowledge of the subject matter, et cetera, et cetera. So, and we as board members are involved with that. I am going through resumes and applications now from my district, which is District 8, and I am reading the qualifications. I'll be contacting some of the reviewers if their application is not really complete or if I have another question about their experience. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with so many reviewers and not as many books. I would think that that number might drop, the 154 books. We might not have quite that many that submit. So I'm going to stop talking here and see if there are any questions. I didn't even touch on Common Core except very, very briefly because that's a whole different lecture, which I'm happy to do sometime. Yeah. Any questions about House Bill 5, about books? Yes, sir.
Yeah, you mentioned that if you don't take Algebra 2, there's certain downsides, such as you can't be in the 10% and other things. You also mentioned that you still have to take these courses when you first get into college. Excuse me. At any rate, is there a waiver that the parents have to sign for that?
There's not a waiver that they have to sign for their student not to take Algebra 2, but at the end of their 8th grade year, the counselor and the student, and there is a parental guardian or parental relationship that a student has to have signed by someone in authority to let them know what their endorsement is going to be, because every student has to start with an endorsement in mind. Because remember, we want them to graduate with 26 credits or more. We don't want them to just shoot for the 22. But no, there's other than that, no.
And what would happen in the legislature if there was a change in House leadership? In terms of
It'd have to
your
be a really
ability
big
to move
change
things?
because this thing was almost unanimous.
Huh?
I said it would have to be a huge change because House Bill 5 passed almost unanimously
Well, that's
in both
because
the
that's
Senate
what's
and
out
the
there.
House. So, but that's a good question. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that the school boards and individual administrators could sign that these textbooks did meet the
Right,
standards.
right.
And they sign it. What is the ramifications if it's found to actually not be?
Well, I actually have to back up because there's
No penalty.
no one can check. The Texas Education Agency had to cut 40% of their staff in the session in which SB Senate Bill 6 was adopted. So there's no authenticating and
So they just sign off on it.
they're putting their names on there, and so, you know, I would hope that most school board members and superintendents are of good repute, and they're not gonna put their name on something unless they've really thoroughly checked it.
So,
That's okay, but she has her hand at me too.
well,
Okay, Julie.
okay, so the bias issue, say I'm a parent, and I wanna know, the books that have been adopted in my school district, who is checking for that kind of thing? If
I noticed in the paper, The Villager, I think it might have been in December, did any of you see it? There was a little paragraph, and they did the right thing. Conroe ISD really typically does such a great job. And it was an announcement of where the books were being housed, and that they were open for public review. And you would have had to go up to the central ad building, I think is where the books were, to look at them. But they were inviting members of the public to come up and take a look at the potential books that they might be purchasing.
So, are you restricted to the charge of only looking for errors? Or can you go beyond and make that information available for a parent to come?
The textbook reviewers can look for the factual errors, and then TEKS cover, the curriculum standard coverage, just that each standard is covered, not how or if it's biased. But we do have reviewers who can submit a minority report along with their evaluation. If they disagree with their panel, for example, when history's coming up, if maybe the information about the Civil War, not everybody, the panels are typically 3 to 5 people, so maybe on a U.S. history panel, there are 5 people, and 4 of them agree with how the books are presenting the Civil War, and 1 of them doesn't. That one can put their point of view on the evaluation itself.
Is that available to parents?
It can be available. It has never been in the past, but Texas Freedom Network for the first time submitted a public information request for the science evaluations themselves, names of reviewers and all. And that had never been done before. I hadn't even ever really thoroughly looked at an evaluation unless there were errors or something like that. But they actually requested the specific evaluation sheets just on the biology books, So since it's been done, I'm sure it'll happen every time now. But there'll be different members of the public who want to look at the exact evaluations. I know. Yes, ma'am.
Somebody sent me a link to something called Can I See? It's a group or an organization that is asking, can I see what you're presenting in the classroom? Can I see what textbooks you're using or whatever? I think it's out of Dallas. I'm not sure. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. Is it like canic.com?
I think so. Mm-hmm.
I would love to look into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you.
I did get a chance to really look all the way through
Okay.
it. So.
And if anything, C-Scope made it very, very clear that parents can see any instructional material, any lesson plan, any textbook, anything. So that was a benefit of that whole thing, one of them. Yes, ma'am.
For the new standards that are coming online, where can the community colleges fit in towards helping,
Do you mean the House Bill 5
Yes.
graduation? That's a great question. I was in very close touch with our Commissioner of Higher Education, who I greatly admire. His name is Raymond Paredes. And he has done a great job as our higher ed commissioner, but there had not really been that much of a relationship between the board and the higher ed commission. And so all of that is changing. I had him come out more than once to speak to the board. We're continuing that. And all 50 of the community colleges are very, very interested. I think they're slowly coming to realize exactly what is in House Bill 5 because of that remedial course that has now been dropped down to senior year of high school. Now, community colleges will still, of course, I'm sure, have remedial math classes. I'm not saying that. But this will directly impact them, and I think they're kind of just now sort of finding out in some way. I think some of them that kept up more with the legislation, some of the community colleges knew what was in there. This will impact them, because these kids were paying for the class under them, right? And but if we're going to put the kid first, this might be a better way. Maybe to catch them earlier and see if we can, bring them up so that they can be successful if they go to community college or a four-year college. Maybe catching them a little bit earlier. I don't know. We'll see. Got to get some research. Data has to come in. So, good. What a good class. Asking great questions. Yes, ma'am. Just tell me when I need to stop.
Did I understand you to say that the students that take the remedial math class receive
No, they do not pay. They pay for it at the college level and community college. But no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to confuse you. Not at the high school level. So that's a great question. Where will that funding come from?
You've already told me a lot about me.
Should be interesting. Yes, ma'am.
A couple of days ago, on the front page of the Houston Chronicle, they said that with all the wonderful industrial development we're having in the college, we apparently are not using high school and community college graduates to take those jobs. And I was just wondering how House Bill 5 fits into preparing kids, because especially in our area, where we
Right.
just had an explosion of both things that I think to import people to Texas, or we could be.
No, and that is one of, I'm not sure how to make this go backwards. Am I gonna get it? Okay, whoops, that didn't do it. I wanted to go back. Remember the 5 endorsements that a student chooses from? So for example, if they choose STEM, then they will, hopefully be taking at least 4, maybe even 5 classes in science, technology, engineering, or math. So this frees up more electives for a student to actually take courses in what they're very interested in. And I think that, as I mentioned at the beginning, that flexibility piece of the bill is actually going to benefit our students. If they're a student that is really interested in business or industry, then they're going to take a heavy class load with that in mind. So same with fine arts. I think, if we can capture their interest and keep them interested in what they like, then hopefully they're going to stick around and graduate and actually move on to community college or beyond. I think the goal for all of us, and here's why I want to get the message out to parents, we don't want to graduate kids just to get jobs. We want to graduate them to have a career. Remember my stepping stone? That's different. We just want to, boom, fill up the welder positions. No, I'm not with that. But if we want that to be a starting point, but yet the student still has the choice after however many years in that industry to maybe move up to be a manager of welders and maybe move on up. See what I'm saying? So to me, that's a big, big difference. We're preparing our students for careers, not just jobs. Is that it?
No, not it.
Oh, my, would have been the same without
Oh,
Walter.
my Lord.
All right, make it quick, and then I'll come have a personal Q&A with you after.
Where will it be?
Right there, right
I'm
there.
scared of going out to the parking lot with anybody in
No,
there.
no, right here.
Okay, you mentioned the villager, and you mentioned Senator Letitia favorably, I think. She will be the Democratic,
I've had very nice conversations with her. She's
Well,
very
that's good.
admirable, yeah.
we agree on that. Okay, and listen, I just want to tell you what a splendid job you did and you're doing. This is the way to present a program. You summarize it, you get it out in 20 minutes. I can't do it, and most speakers
Thank you,
can't.
Walter, appreciate
Hey,
that.
but here's the question I've got.
Oh,
You
here's the
mentioned the
question.
village. Yeah, here comes the heart. You mentioned the village. So I'm tying this into the village. You had a letter in the village. As chair of the State Board of Education endorsing Bruce Tuff. Do you stick by that? And do you think it was proper for you to do it in your capacity as state board chair?
Absolutely, I can endorse whoever I choose to endorse.
All right.
He is one of the few races I am endorsing. We go back many, 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 many years, and we have a very good working relationship. So he's who I personally endorse, but I certainly think everyone in this room needs to check out the qualifications of both candidates, because they're certainly both very excellent candidates. There's no question about that, which is a good problem to have. So, all right, with that.
Super great.